Let's dive into those, and we're going to begin with the Notre Dame rushing offense against the Purdue rush defense. And at the beginning of the year, I would have told you that those ranks would have been about right where I expected them to be if you flipped them. Notre Dame's rush offense, good but not great, top 40-ish. Purdue's rush defense would struggle, which it has done for quite some time. But instead, we're talking about a Notre Dame rushing offense that just can't move the ball.
Right.
And we're talking about a Purdue, rush defense that's played very well. And, again, we talk about what they've done in the first two games. They haven't played a great team. Right. They held Oregon State, however, to 77 yards and 3.1 yards per carry. Oregon State last year was a very good rushing team. They averaged 197.6 yards per game last year, 5.4 yards per carry. Purdue shut them down in a pretty impressive fashion. And then Oregon State went out in their second game of the year, rushed for 256 yards and 6.1 yards per carry against Hawaii. They were at 77 yards and 3.1 against Purdue. So this has been a good Purdue defensive line, Vince. Here's the concerning thing for me when I watch Purdue's defensive line. This has been a good Purdue defense. When I watch the Purdue defensive line, other than George Karlaftis, and we'll talk more about him specifically when we get into the pass game matchup, but other than him, they don't have any great players up front. They've got good size, however, and they are physical. Like they battle. They're not super talented, but they battle. Well, that's been the issue for Notre Dame so far, is they're getting their butts whooped physically.
Right.
And this is a Purdue team that's got some size. They got one of their D tackle starters is 275, but both of their ends are over 270. Their other nose tackle is 310, or other defensive tackles 310 pounds. They rotate in some bigger players. They're going to throw a lot of guys at Notre Dame. That this is a much more concerning matchup simply because Purdue, based on what they've done the first two games compared to what Notre Dame's done on the offensive line, I'm concerned that Notre Dame is going to have a hard time establishing the point of attack. And that to me is going to be more than anything else in this game. Notre Dame's going to have to establish the point of attack in this game if they're going to want to have a chance to be as successful as they need to be to win this football game.
The fact that you put that as the most important thing worries me because they have not established the point of attack all season. And the level of defense that they've gone up against is not great up to this point. And so the one thing that stood out to me watching Purdue is their effort level and their fight and their grit, and all of the cliche, terms that you want to use, they're all accurate because it's true. And that is how generally you're going to get from Purdue teams. I mean, those are guys that are, your 3-star guys who maybe didn't go big D1, but they went through the Big Ten, which is great. They got a chip on their shoulder and they play
they have that. Plus they have 1 5-star.
Right.
That's the thing is it adds to what they do.
But they play with a chip on their shoulder.
Right.
They play like that's who they are. You know what I mean? They bring that blue collar, tough-nosed effort level that worries me against this Notre Dame team right now, against the offensive line right now.
Yeah, and when you look at Purdue, they had their issues last year under Bob Diaco, but they got better in the run defense. The year before in 2018, they gave up 346 to TCU, 196 to Penn State, 185 to Maryland, 242 to Illinois, 251 to Northwestern, 403 to Wisconsin, 185 to Indiana. Last year, at the beginning of the year, they gave up 195 to Iowa, then 177 against Illinois, and then they had a 176 against Rutgers, but then they were 80, 130, 111. So they started to show some improvement last year. Only gave up 3. I mean, in their last 4 games, they did not allow a single team to rush for 3.5 yards per carry. So this improvement started under Bob Diaco last year, in my opinion. Even though he had plenty of issues in other areas, I'm talking about the run defense.
Sure.
The improvement started last year under Bob Diaco, and so far this season they've been very good. They've given up less than 200 yards a game total. They've given up less than 200 yards in 2 games combined. And as you said, Vince, they play tough. They're not super athletic outside of Karlaftis. Their linebackers have good size, but they're not great players. They're just tough, gritty players. They look a lot like kind of what Cincinnati had last year under Marcus Freeman. They've got that one great edge player. Everybody else is just kind of that blue collar, tough kind of kid, get after it kind of kid.
Sure.
And that's usually, look, their defensive line's not going to be as talented as Florida State's. It's not, but it's going to be more talented than Toledo's.
Right.
And so that's a concerning thing. So when you look at this game and you say, okay, right now we're going to give the advantage we have. I mean, we're going to dive more into it, but look, let's be up front. Right now, the advantage is for Purdue in the run for the run defense against the Notre Dame rush offense. It's going to be advantage Purdue. That has to change on Saturday if Notre Dame is going to get their season back on track. And again, I don't think they have to do it to win. I think there's a lot of things Notre Dame is going to be able to do to win this game. We'll dive into the defensive matchup tomorrow for all the issues we're talking about with the Notre Dame offense and protection and all that kind of stuff. Hey, Purdue has some of those same problems on offense as well with their offensive line. So we have to look at it in context. But for this specific matchup, Vince, they're going to have to figure out ways schematically to get the run game going. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you do schematically. This is going to be a gut check game for the Notre Dame offensive line.
Sure.
This is going to be a pride game for the Notre Dame offensive line, in my opinion.
Well, and you already said that you're giving the advantage to Purdue when it comes to Notre Dame's rush attack versus Purdue's rush defense. And I didn't think I'd be giving advantages to the other team for a while. As we, when we started this and we were doing the first game, we were doing the second game, in the back of my head, I'm like, I'm going to be giving the advantage to Notre Dame an awful lot, moving forward. It's going to be kind of boring that it's always going to be to Notre Dame. Well, the boring has stopped pretty swiftly because I'm with you. The advantage is Purdue based on what we've seen from Notre Dame and what we've seen from Purdue in the first two games. And I didn't really even have to think twice about it. That's where we're at right now. Now, again, does Notre Dame have to win the rushing battle? Do they have to win this matchup to win the game? No, they don't. But the advantage is still squarely on Purdue's side. Right. And at the beginning of the year, I wasn't going to give Purdue the advantage anywhere, right? And now it's squarely on their side. And it's more to do with Notre Dame's lack of production than it is what Purdue is doing to their opponents, to me. But this is still going to be a good Purdue team to go against Notre Dame. It's just Notre Dame's performance has been so lackluster that it's forcing me to take Purdue in this matchup.
So as we look at the specific matchup, here's kind of what Purdue does on the defensive line and against the run. If you look at the numbers here that way, all right, if you look at the numbers to my left, you're right. The interesting thing is, Purdue's yards per game is pretty good. They're a top 40 rush defense.
Sure.
They've been good both games. 77 yards in the opener. They gave up 15 yards to UConn. Excuse me. And then you look at the yards per attempts. Good, top 50. Again, that's a good number. I mean, by the end of the year, that 3.3, if they stay there, is going to be much higher than top 50.
Sure.
When you're playing two games and teams are playing FCS teams, sometimes these stats are going to get padded. And normally in week 3, I'm still using last year's stats to compare, but the stats from last year for both teams are so dramatically different already through two games.
Right.
We're getting a little bit of a head start on using this year's stats. But the number down at the bottom is the interesting one. It's the tackles for loss. And what that tells you about Purdue when you watch them on film is it tells you, okay, they're not a real super disruptive team against the run. And that is what the film shows also. But that's also been the problem for Notre Dame so far. Now, Notre Dame's given up a lot of tackles for loss, but that's actually a little bit of a misleading stat since sacks count as tackles for loss.
It's sacks. I mean, they had 6 sacks against Toledo, for goodness sakes.
Notre Dame, yes, exactly. So Notre Dame's given up a pretty decent amount of sacks this year. So the run now, again, I think it's 10 sacks Notre Dame has given up, I believe, in 2 games. Yeah, so they've given up 10 tackles
the first
for
game.
loss.
Yeah,
right.
Yep.
So they've given up 10 tackles for loss. That's still 5 per game in the run game. That's not good. But
was that you?
That was not me. That was on your end. I don't know if you guys ever in a fire alarm or something.
I have no idea what that was. It scared the out of me, though. I can tell you that. Sorry,
it was not me. But when you look at this game, Vince, it's 5 tackles for loss per game in the run game is still not a good number for a team like Notre Dame.
Yes,
and. But here's the interesting thing about it is that's not a lot of tackles for loss per Purdue because that's not who they are. They're not a gap shooting, penetrating team like Toledo was. They are a physical, smack you in the mouth, try to get a push team. And then they want to let their linebackers run to the ball.
They want to flow. Yep.
That's a concern. That's the concerning part. There's twofold, one negative, one positive, right? Because I don't want this to just be a Debbie Downer show about Purdue, right? But the negative is that's where Notre Dame has struggled so far. They're getting no push at the point of attack. And this is a bigger defensive line that wants to keep everything at the line of scrimmage. Keep you at the line of scrimmage, let their linebackers run free. Well, Notre Dame's offensive line has had a terrible time getting up to the second level by everyone except, whose name is not Jarrett Patterson, right? So this is the concern. I look at this and I say big defensive line, depth on the defensive line. They're going to throw waves at Notre Dame. Not super talented outside of Karlaftis, but tough, blue collar. Right. You said chip on your shoulder kids with some size and some toughness. That's also a very veteran group. So they're guys that have been in the weight room for 3-4 years. That helps them as well. Now that's the negative based on what we've seen from Notre Dame. The positive is, for me, if Notre Dame can be successful getting movement in this game, it'll be a great sign because of the way that Purdue plays. It's a troubling matchup based on what we've seen, but it's also a good test for Notre Dame to see what kind of growth they can make in this week. Because to me, Vince, the biggest change that you can make in a short period of time is attitude.
Yeah.
And that to me is the biggest thing with this line is I've had like Brian Kelly made the comment, we need to simplify things. No, that has nothing to – Notre Dame has run 3 running plays basically this whole season. Inside zone, outside zone, and counter. They've run a couple mid zones here and there, but they literally have run like 3 running plays. If you need to simplify that, then you've got a huge problem. Huge problem.
Absolutely.
So this isn't about – go ahead, Vince.
Oh, I was going to say it's because it's an execution problem. It's not a play calling problem.
I'd go beyond the execution problem. You are correct. I think at the heart of the execution problem is a lack of toughness problem. I mean, that's it. Look, zone to me is 2 things, right? And you tell me if you agree with this. Zone to me, being a good zone team is number 1. It's about execution, getting the communication. But number 2, being a good zone team is about toughness.
Sure.
You got to battle.
Absolutely. And it's about double teams, and it's about communication.
Movement.
And it's about movement. That's exactly right. It's moving that first guy so that you can get to the second guy. If you're not moving guys with the double team, you're never going to get to the second level, ever. It's never going to happen. And that's part of the problem is they're not moving the first wave to go to the second wave because it's like a feel thing. When you're double teaming somebody and you know that you got them and it's time for the other guy to take over, it's a communication thing where, okay, you go and it's even almost an unspoken thing. It's then the next guy goes up to the next level. But if you're not getting movement, you stay on that double team, and it allows those linebackers to roll. So it's very disturbing what we've seen up to this point. But again, it's all fixable stuff. It's absolutely fixable stuff. And we talked about last week being a get right game. Well, this could be that too. This is a pride game. This is a get right game. You have the opportunity to get right if you bring the proper mentality to this game. Purdue can get run on. They can. And your guys are better than their guys. They are. Right. But you have to have that mentality or else it won't matter.
So let me talk about a couple things I think Notre Dame needs to do in order to have success in this game. Here's some tangible things. We're talking about attitude and pride and all that kind of stuff. But let's talk some football, right? That's what we do, right, Vince? So to me, if I'm the offensive coordinator, these are the things I'm looking to establish this week, right? Tuesday practice, you get your first practice this afternoon. These are the things that I hope that they are number 1. And Michael Johnson talked about this in our show yesterday, Vince. Is number 1 to me the splits seem unnecessarily tight. Now, zone splits are always going to be somewhat smaller, but they seem unnecessarily tight, which is creating any opportunities to kind of 2 guys to step together and get forced because when they're stepping together, they're bumping into each other.
Yeah, right.
And like I've said, there's plays where they're running inside zone where they're butt to butt to butt. That's a huge problem when you're running. The only time you want to do that is on 4th and inches and you're running like a wedge play or a hard zone where it's just push the guy off the line. So I think that's one thing for me. I think the splits would allow for a little bit better timing.
Okay.
I think that would lead to you have to play with more force, right? That's going to be a big thing is you've got to step with power. Like we're seeing no power steps from this group, right?
Correct.
Like it's all kind of like pick your foot up and put it down and then catch.
Right.
We need to see a step, bring that second foot with your hips, explode through contact. They're doing a lot of just hand play where they're just putting hands on guys. We need to see them striking and playing with force. That's a big thing. That can be fixed like that. That can be fixed by today's team session with a good offensive line coach. So those are things that I want to see. Power step, drive your hips through contact, be physical with your hands. Because this isn't despite Brian Kelly's comments about how young it is, it ain't. You've got 4 offensive linemen that have been in college football at least 3 years in the starting lineup today. Okay. And you've got one guy that's been in college football for 6 years, one that's been in for 5, and another one's been in for 4.
Right.
And 3 of those 4 guys have been in Matt Balis' strength program. Okay. This ain't a weight room problem. Okay. This isn't a weight problem. This is a how you're executing your assignment problem. Correct. So I want to see that. Timing is a big thing. The timing of the run game so far has been terrible up front. Meaning, to your point about not getting off combos, not knowing when to come, either leaving too early or not leaving at all. Part of that is footwork, because guys are like Kane Madden, for example, is not stepping and reaching. He's just kind of stepping, stopping his feet, and he's not able to overtake those guys. So you're going to have to see better timing, which the first 2 things lead into that. They're going to have to figure out an answer for the edge, whether is pulling the ball. I think there's a lot of things that they can do. They can pull the ball, have Jack Cohn pull it and keep it a couple times. I think it's going to be important. Mixing up your formation so that way you're cutting your zones back to the 2 tight end side, as opposed to some other different things that they've been doing, as opposed to kind of running it to the 2 tight end side and bringing one of your tight ends back. You have both your tight ends there and just run that inside zone where you're coming it back to that side. Maybe have an RPO or something to the right that you can isolate against that crashing edge player that side. I think that's something to do, and then beyond that, those are things I think you can do to get your base run game going. Then beyond that, they're going to have to do some things to keep Purdue from just coming downhill, right? They're going to have to contemplate, Brian, can I talk about simplifying things? I think they need to add 2. I think they need some gap schemes, because they don't have, clearly so far, they haven't shown the ability to just go drive block. So they haven't shown the ability to play with athleticism up front. So, okay, so what do you do when you don't have a super athletic line? You have to create running lanes. That's pin and pulls, right? That means trying to, pin, kick out, pin, pull, whatever the case may be. They've got to do something to get the eye discipline of Purdue off. Right. That also includes some quick hitters, some quick pitches. Let your speed get outside. Maybe you have, where you run it to the tight end side and you can crack block with your receiver, and you have Michael Mayer, George Takis lead that guy outside, right? Out to the cornerback. Do something like that where you're getting them thinking, oh gosh, we got to go outside quickly. And then next time, maybe you get into some 2-back sets where you maybe show that action by Chris Tyree, and then you're bringing Kyron Williams on an inside. Sure. I think they need to do some jets where they actually are giving the jet, right? I think they need to run a reverse or 2, just something to get the eye discipline from Purdue off base. And I think, and as I mentioned before, I think we need to see some quick hitters. And we'll get into the pass game too. I think there's some pass game things they can do to protect it a little bit as well. But I think those are the things that I need to see from Notre Dame that are going to tell me that they actually said, hey, something's got to change. Let's fix some things, as opposed to what I'm concerned is going to happen, which is just the players getting the blame and the coaches saying, hey, you're not playing hard enough, blah, 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 blah. We're not fixing anything. It's up to you to fix it, because there are things going on right now that even if the players come out and play harder and better, some of the spacing things, some of the schematic things, some of the those other things are still problems, whether the kids come out and play harder on Saturday or not.
Those are some interesting schematic ideas for sure. And I agree with you. Notre Dame needs to look in the mirror and say, okay, maybe we're not who we thought we were up front. And if we're not going to be, this is what we need to do to counteract that. And those are some great examples of that. And that's going to tell me whether Tommy Rees really has his finger on the pulse of this team and whether he's willing to make the changes in order to stay successful. Because you just outlined all the different things you can do schematically to, I don't want to say hide the offensive line, but to be successful despite the offensive line, to be honest with you.
Because what have we said all summer? You don't need a great offensive line to have a great offense.
Absolutely.
Right? So, and somebody asked this question during the show, Vince, as Andrew Goss says questions for IB. It was said you can use a scheme to protect the O-line. What is it that you can do? And these are some actual run game things, Andrew, that can be implemented. So again, some of them are schematic, some of them are just more technical, right?
Sure.
I mean, the splits, the force, things like that. Those are technical things that just come. I'm repping the heck out of that this week,
right?
You know? But it's going to require the coaching staff to say, and this is my big concern, and unfortunately, they haven't always shown this willingness on offense, especially in the last 3-4 years, to be able to look at it and say, hey, this isn't a player problem. This is an us problem. There's things we need to correct. And I don't mean it in a fireable offense, but hey, look, we thought we could do this, like you said. We thought we could really get tight splits, and we got these big kid, veteran players. We got Kane Madden, who's a big All-American, and Jarrett Patterson and all this other kind of stuff. We thought we were going to have a 335-pound left tackle and all that. Hey, look, we gotta adjust our splits,
right?
Okay, because what else does that do? Is that widens the edge,
correct?
Which is going to help in pass pro, but also help with the run game because it's for a little further to crash, and this is going to allow us to create more running room because right now there's no running room, and part of it is this is a technical problem, not a gut toughness problem. It's you're too close. Right. Now zone naturally is tighter splits. Like, I mean, you look at an air raid team that's running all these pin and pull stuff, and they're going to have wider splits because they're trying to create gaps, run lanes. A zone is more of a, hey, we're working together, and if you're too far away, you can't work on the zones. Teams are going to be penetrating into those gaps, but they're too tight, in my opinion, as I work through the film. And like I said, Michael Johnson made this point in one of our listeners yesterday. So, to me, Vince, those are really easy fixes.
Sure,
that can add something to this.
Well, and I'd like to see, from a player development standpoint, obviously the simple one is I just need to see some of these guys finish. And you brought up Kane Madden stopping his feet. You got to finish. You got to finish those blocks, right? If you're in the right place, great, finish it. The other thing is, for more of a scheme thing, I mean, you brought up a bunch of stuff. I'd also like to see, a little bit of wham blocking, some of those things to just because right now defensive lines are just pinning their ears back and they're coming after Notre Dame and they're being aggressively, just coming at them. Slow them up a little bit. I don't want to use the term ear hole because that brings some negative connotation, but if you get ear holed a couple times as an interior defensive lineman, and you understand what I'm saying from a wham block, right? Mm-hmm. You get ear holed a couple times, you're hesitating a little bit.
Your head's on a swivel.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And that can help Notre Dame in their run game if you slow those guys down a little bit, right?
And they don't have that right now.
Exactly.
It's all just
absolutely correct. Right. And wham blocks and pins and pulls and things, those are the kind of things that we do at the high school level because we don't have kind of the horses to do a lot of zone blocking, right? And I don't trust them to be going double teams and going up to the next level and communicating. And some good teams can do that, and we've done it some, but you almost scheme your way into run game stuff, traps and whams and pins and pulls and things of that nature. You're getting those guys moving and you're creating lanes, and I think I would like to see a little bit more of that from Notre Dame, and I think that could be very beneficial to them.
And we're not asking Notre Dame to reinvent their running game. That's not going to happen 2 weeks in the season. But there are wrinkles.
Yes.
A look here, a look there, off of who you are. Right. That can work. For example, to your point, Vince, I like where you're going with this. So Notre Dame brings their tight end from play side, backside all the time. Okay, on inside zone, he's securing that backside edge, which is fine in some looks. But you know what? What if they did that to where they kind of showed that same look, but then all of a sudden he's taking the nose tackle and whamming them. Oklahoma does stuff like that, right? Those are things that you're talking about. That's a wrinkle off of who you are. You're not just inventing you're reinventing your offense in week 3. But there are some things like that. Your counter concept is a pin and pull, essentially. So you sort of have that, but now this team has run G scheme a lot in the past, right? Pin and pull type stuff. There needs to be something, whether I would even honestly, what I would do is I would just put in an old school sweep, just an old school buck sweep, just a pin and pull buck sweep. I would seriously look into doing
down
that.
Here, and then you're coming around and you're lead blocking.
If you're getting your butt kicked in the box, then spread the dang thing out, right? Create some running lane. You've got 2 great running backs that can take advantage of that. So those are some of the things where they have designed a run game so far in 2 games that is attacking teams with the thought that we still have a great offensive line. Correct. Right? I mean, it's inside zone, outside zone, and counter. They're still thinking they have the team from last year.
Sure.
You don't have that, and you don't have Harry Heastand coaching them.
Right.
And so you don't have Chris Watt coaching them. So you're going to have to say, if you're Tom Rees, hey, look, we're going to have to scheme our way to some success.
Right.
And those are some things we can do. Now,